And Futamata has brought the Mardu Winota deck that was incredibly popular towards the end of last season. I say season, right before the ban list, we should say, popularized by Michael Jacob at the Pro Tour final, or Players Tour finals, rather, just a couple of weeks ago. This is the much more aggressively slanted deck that's trying to use cards like Legion Warboss and Raise the Alarm to enable Winota and have these Judith the Scourge Divas and Basri's Lieutenants to just slam the door shut on turn 4.
And Michael Jacob popularized this deck as a response to Team of Reclamation. So excited to see if the deck has legs in this new iteration of Standard without Reclamation, without Growth Spiral. And this is just a powerful deck. The floor is low. You certainly get some awkward-looking draws like this one that we see from Futamata here. But the ceiling is very high. You know, if you get to land a turn 4 Winota, join your forces with some creatures in play, that is one of the scariest starts in Standard, especially with some of those former boogeymen gone.
Speaking of scary starts, there is not a red source in sight in Futamata's hand here. And that's one of the things that a lot of aggro decks, the multicolor ones specifically, have struggled with throughout this format. The mana is not that great, so stumbling early just costs you so many points.
Yeah, Futamata, until this turn, literally cannot cast any spells. So that Black Red off the top, a real boon there for him. Luckily for David Inglis, they have a hand with several removal spells to help keep pace with this what could have been a fast start from an aggro deck.
So would you say that we may have a serious extinction event coming up on our hands?
Sure's looking that way, and here's Uro on turn 3, getting some of that life back, accelerating David Inglis to that 5 mana mark on turn 4 for Nizza Who Shakes the World.
Oh, and there's a lot of even mana cost cards.
Oh, here's Basri's Lieutenant. And it turns out Extinction Event can wipe off those lieutenants without leaving any knights behind. Nothing dying to that. At least in a literal sense.
Do you think there's a world where Teferi might come down before Nissa because you don't want to animate a bunch of lands if you're planning to cast Extinction Event for an even number?
I could see it. Maybe if Inglis draws a sick land, he might decide that he can afford to throw one into the maw over a possible Extinction Event. I wonder if we could also see Emma just Nissa go. Is that on the table here?
Oh, God, I hope not. That is hideous, especially in a deck that's able to just create sort of haste threats via Winota, Joiner of Forces, and some of the other cards available. I would be a little bit worried about just kind of presenting a copy of Nissa without actually any way to get immediate value off of it.
Especially in the face of something like a Judith or a second lieutenant, pumping up that first lieutenant and taking down Nissa. I think that's too high risk for not much reward here, but we'll see what Inglis decides to go for.
Right, and this is the kind of card that you plan to just take over the game. You don't need to just jam it out as early as possible to get value off of it. You'll find a way eventually as long as the game progresses to that point.
And we'll see if Inglis cracks that second Fable Passage. Looks like he will. So possible we will see Nissa before too long here. And there it is, the best card in Standard, as Todd Anderson labeled it last round. Hard to disagree with him, and I think we're going to see just why in this game.
Oh no! Embercleave off the top, but no additional red sources to make it happen.
That Embercleave somehow feels a long way off. And so in theory, the second lieutenant, putting a hand on itself offers some measure of insurance, but Inglis has that brutal Extinction Event to slam the door shut.
Ugh, this is gross.
You even get to follow up with holding up Aethercast, so we could also play Teferi Master of Time on this turn.
Ugh. There's so much that can be done this turn.
I will name even. And then have any one of a number of devastating follow-ups.
Yeah, at this point, it really is just Inglis kind of figuring out the actual path to get across the finish line rather than figuring out if Inglis is going to win. This is just such a brutal turn of events for Futamata.
There's Casualties of War as well. If you thought that Embercleave is a long way off right now, let me tell you about Casualties of War, Emma.
Ugh.
There is a Lazartet Reaver. Could have used that one 4 or 5 turns ago.
On one hand, you want to be optimistic and say, well, maybe this into Winota or something to that effect, but even then there's this copy of Aethergust hanging out in Inglis's hand.
We might even get to escape Uro this turn.
Might. I see David bringing it upstairs right now.
And this is what you kind of sign up for with this Mardu Winota deck, where you'll have lots of games that aren't competitive because you play turn for Winota and bash their skull in, and then you also have a lot of games where you don't cast any meaningful spells and are never really in the game. But that's you take the good with the bad when you sign up to play a deck like this.
Right. These are both players who are in the 4-0 bracket, which means that this Mardu Winota deck does have legs, and it can actually just rumble in. And when it's firing on all cylinders, it doesn't even feel like a standard deck.
There's Winota, but Aethergust, I think, going to slam the door shut on this game. And there it is. You see Futamata. So that's a good game. Packs it in. And we'll be heading to a game 2 here with Timegrams himself up 1 game, playing for 5-0, trying to stay undefeated in this tournament. And we see for Futamata immediately putting those duresses into their deck. Not much else here that's appealing. Maybe the Noxious Grasps to kill Nissa and also tag an Uro if we need to get that one out of the way. But not too much else that looks appealing here.
Yeah, I don't hate the idea of leaning into something like that. The issue is the more cards that you sideboard in that are just these interactive instant and sorceries, the worse your actual Winotas get. And if you're planning on reaching that point of the game, or if you think that is the only way that your deck can actually stand up pound for pound to what the Sultai ramp deck is doing, then you need to make sure that you're still leaving room for your Winotas to breathe. So I think you really can only afford to bring in maybe one of those Noxious Grasps.
And then for David Inglis, we see Teferi, Master of Time, head the bench, along with Narset Powder of Veils, really not intended for this matchup. Casualties of War is kind of an interesting card here, where it can sweep up everything that's going on and claw you back into the game. At the same time, you could die several turns before you're even able to cast that one.
Yeah, the big draw to something like Casualties of War is it's just a great card at actually slamming the door shut once you've actually once you're at parity, or if it's anywhere close on the battlefield, you can tag the last creature, say they're 1 red source or they're 1 black source. But outside of those games, you're really going to struggle, and you don't want to just be dying on turn 4 with a 6-drop in your hand.
And Disdainful Stroke, a late addition for David Inglis, a good way to tag not only the namesake card in Winota Joiner Forces, but also Basti's Lieutenant, and also the 2 copies of Embercleaver, an addition that in the previous format Michael Jacob moved away from, but showing up again here for Futamata. And Aethergust is an interesting card to look at here. We see a few copies in Inglis's deck, not all of them. Michael Jacob was consciously building his deck and then sideboarding in the games to dodge Aethergust out of Team Reclamation. He would basically be an Orzhov aggro deck, splashing red for his namesake card in Winota. But we see Futamata taking a different approach, leading a bit more into those red cards. And you see a slightly awkward mana base here for Futamata. Again, part of the price of playing this deck, where I guess we're going to have to fetch a Planeswalker end of turn, and then we have the choice between Duress or Lazartet Reaver, when really we would want to curve 1 into 2 with those.
Right. Luckily, there is a point where if there is just another tap land on 3, we could even see something like Lazartet Reaver on 2 and a Duress on 3.
And bad news of sorts for Futamata sees Disdainful Stroke and Noxious Grasp to take out of Winota, as well as Extinction Event, which can mop up a board full of tokens and the other even converted mana cost cards at the same time.
And you see him going for the Sweeper, which makes sense just because that's the thing that is a 2-for-1 in the hand. Everything else is just a 1-for-1. And when you have so many token producers, unless Inglis actually gets a favorable mana exchange on these cards, or a very good mana exchange rather, you're gonna be okay.
Luckily for Futamata, Inglis just has a bunch full of lands and a Hydro Crisis, which he doesn't really want to tap low for at the moment.
No, this is the kind of card that you really want to try and get it for 6 to draw 2 more cards and gain a couple life. Anything less than that frequently just feels like a desperation move.
And I wonder if Futamata wants to use his mana efficiently here to cast a General Kudro, bait out that Noxious Grasp, or he's going to pass the turn play Raise the Alarm and get to follow that up while Inglis has to hold mana open.
The idea here is just that there's the hope that your opponent does something like an Uro and taps low, and then you get to slam the door shut with this Winota.
Ghost Rider is a nice pick out there too. Allows Futamata to develop something to the board that gets around both Disdainful Stroke and Noxious Grasp. So Inglis, with these good reactive cards, which are quite situational, and he's stranded using his mana or not getting to use his mana at all on these turns.
Right, this feels a lot like the incredible sideboard card Aether Gust.
So we have three.
Can be situationally very powerful, but here it's not doing anything. Look how this Woe Strider just cuts through 3 conditional reactive cards in hand.
And Futamata will sacrifice the Go there at end of turn. That one's not attacking, and we're not resolving Winota anytime soon, so we'll sacrifice that. We'll go digging. Judith's Scourge Jeever, actually a nice pickup, but that Aether Gust off the top for Inglis, actually surprisingly timely here.
Yeah, this is a spot where Inglis likely just feels priced into going ahead and firing off the Aether Gust.
And this is a downside of Aether Gust too. It's only a temporary delaying measure, so that Judith going right back on top, I imagine, for Futamata. But we'll see if he has other ideas. And there it is. We get to attack him for 5 in the meantime, knock David Inglis down to 13.
And these sorts of tempo plays are great when you're ahead, but when you're behind, you're just sort of treading water, and all of these exchanges really include a life loss attached to them whenever you're under pressure like this.
And there we go. Legion's End off the top for Inglis. Another strong removal spell, but which is still situational. And that Woe Rider here doing a good job at stopping Legion's End, cleaning up all of those tokens by sacrificing whichever one gets targeted. And so Breeding Pool with Nissa allows Inglis to hold up Disdainful Stroke for a lethal Winota, but Judith gets to sneak underneath that. Or even General Crudo.
And at this point, the Stroke and the Grasp are both face-up information.
And it's tough for Futamata because he knows at this point, if Inglis gets one tap with Nissa, then Inglis can basically hold up Disdainful Stroke for the remainder of the game at very little cost. So, you know, there's not really going to be a good window to stick the Winota, but then there's also not really a good turn to force that stroke out of Inglis's hand, in case you draw another one.
Right, and getting to untap with a Nissa with a Krasis in play is just so brutal in its own right.
So here we go, everything at Nissa. And so sadly for Futamata, Judith can stick around on 1 life. Or 1 loyalty, excuse me. Not trying to anthropomorphize Nezu Who Shakes the World here.
Well, remember, the first words in the original rulebook, you are a planeswalker.
And just what that means has changed a lot over Magic's 20-something years.
What is a planeswalker? Are we here? Is this real, Yenna?
Are we human or are we planeswalker?
How dare you?
And there is Legion's End. Now that Woe Rider is gone, Legion's End gets to clean up both of those tokens. And this might be a good turn for Hydro Krasis.
This is the sort of the turning point for these Sultai decks, right? This is the spot where Inglis actually gets to start leveraging having a mana advantage over this Mardu aggro deck that wasn't really able to get on the board early, and as a result, is now just kind of falling behind with Inglis out of reach of one of these fast sort of punch-in-the-teeth curves that can just punk him out of the game.
And with Nissa, we can untap either Breeding Pool or Overgrown Tomb, depending on which of those interactive cards we prefer to leave up. And this game feels like it's sleeping out of Futamata's reach. And I do wonder what would have happened if Inglis hadn't drawn that Aether Gust. You know, if Judith was able to come down the turn before, power after the attack on that turn. You know, maybe we're looking at a different game right now, but as it is, Inglis seems like he's stabilizing behind this this Nissa.
Right, and these attacks at Nissa are things where you likely feel priced into making these sorts of moves, but over the course of a long game, like how much are you actually gaining from that, right? You're basically spending your whole turn in a card to undo your opponent's land drop. That's not going to win you a long game. You just have to hope Inglis just bricks off forever in that sort of pattern.
We finally have a window to deploy this last set Reaver, but General Kudrow.
Oh, this is super interesting. Oh, this is a cool line.
Okay, so we used up our own board, but we removed both the Hydrokinesis and the Nissa, which is not a bad trade, but Inglis not only has that 3/3 left over, he has a second copy of Nissa Who Shakes the World to follow this up with, and that's now a 2-turn clock. Futamata is in check on this turn.
And this is the kind of play that Futamata was really trying to avoid happening. They didn't think that they could beat another copy of Nissa, so they just wanted to answer the one on the battlefield, and it is not going to work for them.
I'd say it's the second Nissa that gets you. Usually it's the first Nissa. Usually one is enough, but here the second one is really going to propel David Inglis into a dominating position, moving him potentially to 5-0 and a lock for top 8 in our tournament here. So a few different options for Futamata. Can escape a Woe Strider, who plays some combination of the cards in their hand. It is Selfless Savior and Lazartep Reaver.
And whatever's done at this point, it also has to be able to block two things through that Noxious Grasp. That's why Woe Strider didn't work there.
So in theory, Noxious Grasp we take down the Selfless Savior, and then we have 3 lands, all of which are 3/3.
All right, now we have 3 attackers coming through. And the way that this is set up at this point, it doesn't even feel like Futamata really even has to, or excuse me, Inglis doesn't even have to cast any spells. Eventually, Futamata is going to run out of material on the battlefield, and that's just going to be good enough.
Yeah, if David Inglis had cast this game, I think he would still be very solidly ahead. And Inglis on the precipice here. He has to think he's about to clinch a top 8 to start out Season 2, coming off his solid performance in Season 1. Fatal Passage isn't it?
All right, and that is going to put David Inglis to 5-0.